was to increase the amount of affordable housing in towns that prevented it from coming in. The town of Wellesley fought for an extended period of time, almost 10 years, to keep out affordable housing facility. There were no apartment buildings in Wellesley at the time, and now there are only 2. And we need to focus on not only providing the housing stock, but giving the towns a greater degree of control. I would amend Chapter 40B to allow greater, site control, by the towns. But in order to do that, I would also give them money. The state needs to provide money so that the towns will have an ability to have a stake in how projects are sited. Chapter 40B requires that there be some kind of funding, and if the towns themselves have the funding, not just the state and federal government, then they will have a say in where projects can go or not go, because they'll be actually approving the financing on the projects. I also work actively with Habitat for Humanity, and I get them land. They have a great model because it's practically free, requiring the owners to have sweat equity, but not a very large capital investment. So I am working every day to increase affordable housing on a volunteer basis, and when it comes to being a legislator, I will take an active role in making sure that people can afford to remain in their hometowns and live on the North Shore. It is crazy that people, have to pay, double and triple housing prices every few years, and I want to put a stop to that. Thank you.
Our next question goes to you first. Senator Bruce Tarr has proposed legislation to set up water conservation pilot projects, but it hasn't gone anywhere yet. What would you do to address water conservation at the state level?
Well, it's not surprising that it hasn't gone anywhere. The senator is, acknowledgeably he's a Republican and he's in the minority party, so it's understandable that he'll have difficulties getting things passed, and will, in that same way, be less effective. And I think that's why both Andy and I have come here today to give people a chance of effective leadership in the Senate. I would work in various ways to improve, water conservation. One of the biggest problems that we have is in terms of piping. The existing infrastructure in many towns is extremely poor and is unable to take the capacity. The aqueduct coming from the Quabbin Reservoir is a sieve and is now in the process of being replaced. But that model and that problem is present in many of our cities and towns. I would look to providing funds to the towns, not only to improve their water systems, but to give people an incentive to do that in their own homes. I mean, there are many household uses of water that are very wasteful, and as this past summer has shown us, when we suddenly are told that we can't use water anymore, there are many things that we can do to conserve it. North Andover and Middleton in particular had very severe water restrictions, and in fact, poor Middleton is beggared by its neighboring town of Danvers because its water supply is in fact controlled by that municipality. I would see what I can do about fixing that particular problem, although it's a very local one. But there are many things that we can do in terms of regulations of appliances, in terms of industrial usage of water, in terms of what the cities and towns do with their water or don't do with their water. I think that is the way that we can approach the issue of conservation. Thank you.
Mr. Armato.
I think we can approach it in a few ways. First, as a state legislator, I would take, again, a leadership role. I agree with Mark on the role that Bruce Tarr has played in not only this situation, but in other situations. It's almost impossible for him to get done what he says he's going to get done. Common sense would tell you if you put 40 members in a room, 34 on one side and 6 on the other, who's going to win on the issues? This district is at a disadvantage by having a minority party representing it. I think that what I would do is a twofold system. I think that we should first educate our citizens on conservation. We need to invest money in education. Education could require the simplest things of a pamphlet being sent out once a year. That can be done on a local level, as it is being done in many towns today, or on a state level. I think that what we should also do is we should look at our growth. The reason that we're having such water problems today is because of overexpansion, is because of not preserving the open space that we all would like to have, and that we're just building like crazy without a plan, without a strategic plan both on a local level, we may have plans, but it doesn't coincide with the towns that abut us. That we should look on a regional level. Where is the water coming from? Whose is it? And what do we need it for? I think that we should all conserve energy, not only energy, but water. And I think that as a state legislator, I again agree with Mark, that we can legislate how appliances are run, the efficiencies of appliances that will be used in Massachusetts. I think that it requires taking on big manufacturers. I'm not afraid to do that. I don't take any political contributions from them. I don't owe them anything. But what I do know is that the right thing to do is to conserve. And I think that the ways we go about doing that would be to first educate, and second to take a leadership role in making sure that large industries are leaders in conservation of not only water but energy.
Thank you. And our next question, Mr. Armato, is for you first. How should the state address the high cost of prescriptions? Do you think reducing the Medicare reimbursement to pharmacies is feasible, fair?
The simple answer to that question is no. I believe that every business in the Commonwealth should make a decent profit. I believe that if these pharmacies, CVS or Brooks Pharmacy, are going to be in the business of providing a service to the citizens, that they should get paid for that service. But I think the prescription drugs comes into a bigger picture. I think that we need to revamp our healthcare system. I don't think that incremental change is what we need. I think we need a giant change in the way that we provide healthcare, and under that, how we provide prescription drugs. I think that the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and the Veterans Administration have it right, that we should bulk purchase prescription drugs. Everybody in this room does it at their own home. You go to Costco's or BJ's and you buy bulk toilet paper or bulk paper towels. The state can use its purchasing power to reduce the cost from pharmaceutical companies. We need to do that. The reason we haven't done that is because of the big money being spent by pharmaceutical companies to not do that. I think that we need to take a leadership role to say to those pharmaceutical companies, I want you to have a good profit. I think that you need a good profit to reinvest that money in research and development. But today, the pharmaceutical companies are the highest profit makers in the country. Over 300% profit margins on pharmaceutical companies. I think that is outrageous, and I think that it does a disservice to the people of this district and the people of the Commonwealth that need those drugs. Everybody's heard the horror stories of seniors, either choosing food or medication. I think that's a travesty in not only in our healthcare system, but morally, I think that we have an obligation to provide healthcare to every citizen. I think what we could do is we should bulk buy prescription drugs. We should first do that by taking the Medicaid recipients as well as the retired employees, putting them together and seeking bulk purchasing power through that. But I think long term, I think we need to look at revamping our entire healthcare system. I think that the single payer system is the way to go, and that would also include reducing money for prescription drugs.
Thank you. Mr. Caggiano?
I think we need to model our approach, as Andy mentioned, after the Maine program. The Maine program really presents the state of Maine as a wholesaler. They purchase the drugs and they aggregate the buying power with respect to not only people that are in the Medicare and Medicaid system, but people that are uninsured below a certain income level. It's $56,000, a family of four without health care insurance. I think Massachusetts should use that as the beginning of its model, but not the end, because I think Massachusetts can do so much more. We have our state employees, we have people that are in Medicare and Medicaid, we have uninsured, but we really need to conceptualize how we can do it to have all of the citizens of Massachusetts in one giant buying pool, and then go even further and have all of the citizens in New England, and that's a notion that's being put forth, the New England Compact, for the purchasing of prescription drugs. It's far away, and it's something that we need to spend a lot of effort to get to, but I think that's something that we can do on a short-term basis, getting Massachusetts into the game of purchasing drugs. I also think that on the same token, we need to be looking at how drugs are prescribed. There are many sort of slipshod ways of prescribing that just sort of throw drugs at a problem and don't necessarily fix the problem. It's called polypharmacy. It's many drugs being used to serve a problem, but we need to have some good science and look at the professionals, the doctors, nurses, psychologists, at exactly how they are going to go about prescribing drugs. And we're not talking about one or two. We're talking about, in some cases, 15 psychoactive drugs being prescribed for patients with mental conditions. So it's not the simple case of three or four drugs being prescribed. It's when there are many drugs being prescribed for one person, and that is something that is costing the state an enormous amount of money. So that would be a step that I would take. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is to you first. Do you think that passing the MCAS should be a requirement for a high school diploma?
No, I do not. I do not think that the MCAS should be a requirement for passing anything. It was not written for that purpose. It was written as an effort to determine if Massachusetts was using its dollars wisely through the Education Reform Act of 1993. The person that wrote the test testified in front of the legislature and said, I never intended it for this, and it's been co-opted because of a sort of a national fad of having these exams. The problem with that is there's no problem with accountability and there's no problem with testing. The problem is that these tests are taking over our schools. My son is in the 4th grade this year, and they spent literally the second half of the year teaching to that test because it has such a great bearing upon how the schools are going to be, judged in a way. And that's important because the role of the test is to diagnose the problems with the schools, but not to hijack our children's education. I think it should go back to being a diagnostic so that the teachers still have to teach and that they still have to worry about the subject matter, but the children don't have to worry about the doom and gloom of not passing. Now, the other thing you have to keep in mind is that people who have enough money can get training. Princeton Review has a wonderful MCAS program, and all kinds of tutoring can be had if you have the right number of dollars. I think that I taught for Princeton Review, so I know it works very, very well for the very select few who can afford it. I don't think the MCAS should be a graduation requirement, and also bear in mind how many times people are now allowed to take it before actually passing. It's not really providing any kind of indicator on that basis if you have to take it 7 or 8 times. One person actually said to me, well, lawyers are allowed to take the bar as many times as possible. And I said to him, usually when you get to the 5th or 6th time, you get a clue. So I think that we need to look at the MCAS as what it was intended to be, a way of assessing where our dollars are going, and not what our kids are learning or not learning, because it's really perverting the process of learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Armato.
I also do not believe that the MCAS should be a graduation requirement. I do think that we should test students in all grade levels. I also think that we should test teachers. I think the reason for testing obviously is to find out what these people know, not only our students but our teachers. It's the only way for us to accurately assess if we're spending dollars properly, if we have the proper teachers in the proper places. If students are failing, it's not necessarily because they don't know what they should know. It's because they're not being taught what they should be taught. And I think that we should look at teachers, not to put blame on them, but to give them more resources, to find out where more resources should be spent. I don't think it should be a graduation requirement, but I don't think that we should eliminate testing completely. I think that what we should do is we should take those results, and we shouldn't allow them to take it 7 or 8 times. I think that we should take it, they should take it once, maybe twice a year, change the name, don't call it MCAS, so high school sophomores aren't worried about not graduating, and it ruins 2 years of their lives. I think that we have enough stress, or that we put enough stress on children these days, not only just living, but getting a decent education. But I also think that we should hold them accountable for learning. When you talk to freshman professors in almost every college in the country, you'll hear that students today are having to be taught remedial, not only remedial subjects, but that they're losing ground on our competition, not only nationally, but internationally. I think that we should hold them accountable for learning, but we should give them all the tools that they need to learn. And I think just going back to healthcare, we as a country have made it a decision to leave no child behind in healthcare. I think that we as a society should also make a pledge to leave no person without healthcare. We also, in our criminal justice system, any person convicted or arrested for a crime has the right to seek an attorney in the judicial system. I think that any person that needs health care should be able to see the doctor that they need to see.
Thank you. We're about out of time, so our last question of the evening will go to you first, Mr. Armato, and that is it clean elections or taxpayer-funded elections? How do you feel about the non-binding referendum on this issue?
I originally, when I got into this race, seriously contemplated going through the clean elections funding. I think that we really need to change the way elections are funded, not only on our state level, but nationally.